what am I supposed to do? Call everybody every 2 weeks and say, hey, what have you heard? You got anything for me? That's the worst, right? I like to say you never want to lead with your need, right? You've got to project an image that essentially says you're already working.
Welcome to another episode of the Dre and Smiley, The Inner Circle podcast.
Smiley, man, I'm excited about our guest today. When reading about him and what he does, it took me back to, I was in my 20s or so. I remember a lady I worked with was in her late 50s and hated her job. Her concern was she couldn't leave because she was in her late 50s. She felt like she was stuck in that job. She felt like anywhere she went, they were probably going to turn her down because of her age, forgetting about all the experience she comes with. Our guest today talks about the options that actually do exist for those that are approaching their 50s and beyond. So with that, let me read a quick bio here and we'll kick things off. John Tarnoff is an executive and career transition coach, speaker, and author who helps mid-career professionals secure better jobs and build meaningful, sustainable careers. During his 35-year career in film production and tech entrepreneurship, he was fired 39% of the time, learning to turn setbacks into successes. At 50, he reinvented his career by earning a master's degree in counseling psychology to help others navigate their challenges. With that, John, welcome to the podcast.
Great to be here, guys. Thanks for having me on.
So, where do I begin? The first thing, fired 39% of the time. So
Right.
One way to look at that is, what kind of employee were you?
No, because it is a statistic that I came up with in this TEDx talk that I did at the very beginning of my career coaching practice back in 2012. And I was searching for some kind of justification for why am I up here talking about career reinvention? What gives me the credibility, the qualification to talk about it? And I realized, well, in those 35 years in the movie business, it's a volatile business, and you get bounced around a lot. Sometimes because it's your fault, but most of the time because it's, things are changing. People are getting fired above you. Economic times are changing. It's a tough business where you're trying to second guess the changing tastes of the American public. So I realized out of all the jobs that I had, I kind of counted up the ones where I quit and the ones where I got fired, and there you go, 39%. So
Yeah.
I dine out on that because I want people to realize that getting fired is not shameful. And no matter where you are in your career, whether you're young or you're older, it's not about you, it's about fit. And fact is, if it's a fit for you and all of a sudden it becomes no longer a fit because you get disillusioned or you get distracted or you don't have a great relationship with your boss or you don't like the mission the company's on, whatever that might be, and your performance starts to lag, you really want to go off and do something else. On their side, it's the same thing, right? So today, things are changing so much. The average job tenure is across the board, it's about 4 years. For younger people, it's even less. For millennials and Gen Z, it's like 2.5 years. It's the average amount of time people are in jobs. So the whole world that we grew up with, which was, oh, you get a job, you stay in your job for 10, 20 years, and then you get to retire, that's gone. So the 39% kind of sets the stage for the world that we live in today.
Sure. I think a lot of people make the mistake of having their job define them, right?
Yeah,
So if they were
time.
Acme Incorporated and all of a sudden they lose their job, they feel like they have no value, no worth.
Yep.
You clearly persevered. You were resilient. Where does that come from? And how do you coach people who have that mindset?
Yeah. First of all, you're so right that we identify too much with our jobs. And it makes sense because we spend so much of our time with our job. But notice how we talk about this. If someone comes up to you at a party or says, so what do you do? And you say, well, I am a this, right? I am a an engineer. I am a IT specialist or whatever. But that's not who you are. It's what you do. But we tend to absorb that identity of the job into our identity as a person. And the more accurate thing to say is I work as. But we don't say that, right? Because we're conflated around those things. So I think that is that's the start of it. And we have to kind of build from there. And the idea of resilience for me certainly comes from the fact that, again, I got fired a lot. I had to pivot. I had to learn to pivot. The one thing I will say about being in the entertainment business is that I never used a resume to get a job. And that really became kind of cornerstone to the methodology that I use, which is that if you're trying to go through the front door, particularly as an older candidate, you are kind of tying one arm behind your back, if not both of them, because you're not going to be able to get in the door with a resume today. The noise is just enormous. Look, I'm on Reddit. I see what people are saying across all age ranges. It's true, no matter how old you are, it's a hard thing to do to get in the door with a resume.
Well, the one thing that you had is getting fired is not shameful. That sounds
Right.
like a T-shirt.
Yeah. That's a good idea. I should do that.
Getting fired is not shameful. But one question I have is when you talked about the 4 years, it's 4 years people staying, how does the numbers translate to productivity? If I'm a big company, am I turning over my labor force, either
Yeah.
the good ones, the bad ones, let's say
Yeah.
the good talent, every 24 months, 48 months, they're leaving. Is that impacted positively or negatively on the productivity of the business?
I don't know the stats. I've got to believe that it's negative, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's also a symptom of the changeable and disrupted climate that we're in economically. Companies, I like to say to people, look, the companies are more scared than you are, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you get laid off, there's a reduction in force or whatever they call it.
Mm-hmm.
They're scared. They are terrified, and they are lashing out at their workforce because they think we got to do something. We got to change. We got to get rid of these people for this reason. It's not always about age. A lot of it's about age, but we got to do something. We got to change. And someone comes up with some bright idea up in some senior level of management. We're gonna pivot to this thing. We're gonna focus our business in this direction. So make those changes. I mean, statistically, I have no idea. I think probably for some businesses it works. Maybe it works for a short period. For other businesses, it's a disaster and they try to sweep it under the rug. I mean, I think in terms of maintaining a mission and a company culture, it sounds like a bad idea, right?
Also, in your bio, you mentioned that at 50, you decided to get your master's. Why 50? Why not 45? Why not 40? What was the catalyst that said, you know what?
Right.
I got all this years of experience and I don't even go through the front door. I got a strong network because that's what I deduce from that.
Right.
What was the catalyst that said that at 50, I want to go to college and be with grad school and be with these young folks under 30.
Right.
I'm 57, 58, 57. So I call people under 30 young folks. So what was the catalyst that made you want to go and immerse yourself into that generation, that culture to just learn?
Around that time. Well, so I had to, right? This wasn't I wasn't like, sitting, popping chocolates into my mouth on a Sunday afternoon, leisurely thinking I'd like to go back to school. I had to. I was in a real crisis. I had a startup in the 1990s during the tech bubble, and I was kind of strangely, in a strange way, I was kind of done with the movie business at that point. I felt like I had kind of, struggled and I had some reversals and it was hard. It was hard to kind of keep going in those roles. And I was very inspired by technology. What was going on with multimedia production in the early 90s. And I started getting to CD-ROM and I met a partner. We did a couple of CD-ROM game projects together. And then he came up with this technology idea. And we partnered and we started to raise money because this is what was going on in the mid 90s. And we put a really cool little company together doing AI and a character animation. So this was kind of like Siri with a face before there was any of this stuff. It was natural language AI, and we made this big deal with Sprint to do a customer service character for their website, and we were going great guns. We had a couple of dozen developers working in this warehouse in Venice out here by the beach. And then in the spring of 2001, the stock market crashed. The NASDAQ lost half its value in 3 weeks or something like that. Everything went away. The Sprint deal collapsed. The investors got cold feet. And we were just sitting there, holding hands going, what the hell is going on here? And we wrote that down. We had to fire everyone. We had to kind of keep the investors from suing us. I mean, it was crazy times. And when in the dust of all that, I thought, what the heck am I going to do now? I had no idea. But I knew that I needed to do something. I needed to change it up. And you asked me in your questions, what's the biggest risk you ever took? And the biggest risk I ever took was going back to school, because I had no idea what I was going to do. And I thought, if I go back to school, maybe I'll start thinking differently. And this psychology program was, I didn't do psychology because I thought, I'm going to be a psychologist. Although in a strange way, I kind of wound up going in that direction. But I wanted to start thinking differently about me, about how I saw the world, and learn some new things and kind of distract myself from the doom that was playing out in my head every day. And I had a kid in private school, and my wife at the time wasn't working, and it was make or break.
Well, that is so phenomenal. The one thing is, you said the biggest risk was going back. Now, where you are today, looking back, was that the greatest return?
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right,
absolutely.
cool.
And I think there's this idea that God rewards the bold move. Mm-hmm. And I think at a certain point, one way or another, we have to bet on ourselves. We have to take that risk. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But I think that for most of us, being willing to take that risk is going to lead you in a direction that will ultimately be successful for you. It may be painful. You may scrape the bottom, but at the end of the day, you're going to survive. You're going to figure something out, because that's what we do as human beings.
Right. Self-preservation, right?
Yeah.
We kind of figure things out and make it happen. Let's go back to the scenario of the young lady that I mentioned earlier that I worked with. She's in her 50s, and her fear wasn't being unable to find a job. So she's stuck with a job where she was miserable.
Yeah.
You mentioned today it'll be difficult to find a job with a resume. So that lady in her 50s, that's all she's probably known. So walk me through that. I think I have a good sense of what you mean, but walk me through that. How do you secure a job without a resume? You go online, you see a job posted. What do you do?
Well, first of all, everyone has to have a resume. You got to have a resume. But I would say today that a resume is not the primary means of getting a job. It is a placeholder. It's a tracking device that an employer or recruiter will use to kind of identify you. It's kind of like your calling card in the process. It's that item that you have to have on file somewhere to verify that you're in their system. So that's what a resume is. And it's important that the resume be accurate, and it be well formatted, and it be applicable to the career you've had, the industry you are in, and the jobs that you want to go up for. But the key to success and sustainability and survivability in the career world today is your network. You have to either maintain, or you have to re-engage with your network and meet new people. It's all about conversations. People get to know you through having conversations with you. They learn to trust you. They get a vibe, right? And there's a lot about getting a job and being in your career that's like dating, right? Relationships. It's about building relationships. This idea of never having to search for a job again, which I throw out there and people are going to go, whoa, that's a kind of a heavy statement, comes from the fact that if you are actively engaged with your network, and I would actually put a bit of a precision on this idea of network and really say it's not so much a network, it's really more of a community. You want to build a community of shared interests, people who are aligned with what you believe, how you think, what you've done, your notion of how your business works. You want to vibe with these people. They're going to find you more people who are in the same kind of mindset. And through this consistent engagement, you're going to find opportunities, or you're going to create opportunities, or people are going to help you create opportunities. They're going to say, hey, look, I know you really well, or I've just gotten to know you, but there's something that kind of stands out about how you roll. Have you ever thought about doing this? And you think, wait a minute, yeah, kind of in the back of my mind, I've thought about that, but tell me more. Why do you think I'd be good at that? And they go, well, because of A, B, and C reason, and I know someone, let me introduce you. All right, and this is how the process starts. So for your colleague who is there feeling isolated in her 50s, probably hasn't kept up with her network, probably doesn't have a really clear sense about what she does that's different from what anyone else does. I'm going to kind of go into the three elements that I think are really key for all of us to bear in mind when we're in the career game today. Network and community are central to it, but the first element really is you got to know yourself. You've got to know your superpower. You've got to know what it is that you do well, that you love to do, that moves the needle, that's truly useful in the world that you work in. So if you have that clear sense of what your superpower is, and you're defining that, and I would say the way to define it today is on LinkedIn, right? If you don't have a LinkedIn profile that is acting as your marketing hub and helps you define and articulate your superpower, well, you got to get busy, because that's where people are going to find you. That's where recruiters are going to find you. If you submit a resume, the first thing they're going to do, if they look at the resume, is look you up on LinkedIn, right? They want to see your picture. They want to see your education. They want to see your background. They want to see how you present yourself on that platform. So you've got that. Then you've got your community. If you've got that platform, that profile on LinkedIn, your community can kind of go, oh, here's who Smiley and Dre are. I get what they're about. I get what they've done. Hey, got it. Now I have a better understanding. Now I can market for them, actually, because they've made it so easy for me to understand what they do and how they can be dangerous in the world of our business. But then there's the third element, which addresses the question of, okay, I've got all these network connections. What am I supposed to do? Call everybody every 2 weeks and say, hey, what have you heard? You got anything for me? That's the worst, right? I like to say you never want to lead with your need, right? You've got to project an image that essentially says you're already working. You're always working in your business. You're always contributing in your business. And the way you do that, to me, is to build a brand around thought leadership. This idea that no matter what you do, you've got interests, you've got ideals, you've got values. You want to stand up for what you stand for as a thought leader, no matter what you do. I don't care if you are, selling candy in a convenience store. You've got ideas about what's going on. You see people coming in and out of your shop, right? You've got an idea of how the world is. No matter who we are, what we do, we've got ideas. At the end of the day, your ability to fit into a company culture is going to depend on people going, I like the way that person thinks. I like the way they're wired. I like what they believe in. I like how they kind of comport themselves in their lives. That's what being a thought leader allows you to do. So whether you do this on LinkedIn and you're engaging with people and having conversations on LinkedIn or other social networks that are appropriate to your business, whether you're engaging in professional organizations, you're mentoring, you're volunteering, you're going on podcasts like this. You guys are creating a podcast. That's thought leadership, times 100, right? This is all about getting people to know you and trust you as an expert in your field. So those three elements all together create this flywheel where if you engage in this and just start a little bit at a time, it's going to build momentum. And people are going to go, who is that person who is being consistent out there? I know what they stand for. I know what they do. I'm seeing them all over the place. They're presenting this consistent picture of the value that they provide in their career. I want to have a conversation with them. And
John,
that's
I can tell you've been doing this for a while because I had a list of questions and you just systematically went through and checked all those boxes. Just one comment, I'll pass it over to Smiley. Something that he and I talk about often is relationships. Relationships are everything, right?
yeah.
For
Yeah.
so many different reasons. Obviously, in the case of looking for employment, it's a key way to connect with others and let them know who you are and what your needs are. Smiley.
Before I get to the serious question, do you have any merchandise? For example, you said your
Lead
need.
with your need. I wrote that down.
And then it said, stand up for what you stand for. These are t-shirts. That's another revenue stream.
Okay. I'm on it. I'm
Yeah,
on it. I'm going to put a little thanks to Dre and Smiley for the inspiration.
There you go.
And I speak with a lot of people all the time. Every weekend we're speaking. But you have so many catchy phrases. I'm like, that's a t-shirt. Never lead with the lead. I love that. But the question I have is, you said something, because I'm in technology. You mentioned AI, 2001, Brent. So you were like the leader of AI because AI wasn't even talked about in 2020 or 2001.
Yeah.
Then I want to bring us up to the current. You're doing podcasts, you're doing TED Talks, you're doing the coaching. Have you ever thought about, and now everyone's talking about AI. Have you thought about resurrecting what you were doing in 2001 to make you virtual or an avatar of you? And now you got AI John. I mean, it was just like that whole continuum. You were before time technology. So now technology caught up to you and you got all this content. Is that something from a business side, or have you thought about bridging that?
I mean, not really. I mean, that was so rudimentary compared to what AI is today. It was very early stage. I mean, I love technology. I started with a Apple IIc in 1982 or 1983. I thought, whoa, this is cool. And people would come into my office thinking, what is that? What do you do with that? Is that a toy? It's like, no, I'm actually I've got a database of information here and, ask me a question. So, no, I mean, I think for me, it's really been about moving on. I mean, the ironic thing about going to school and that degree is that got me back into the movie business, but in a very different way. That got me into a kind of a people-oriented role at DreamWorks Animation, which I had for most of the 2000s. And that really they hired me because of my movie business background, but also because of my technology background, because they were in a kind of a startup mode where they were transitioning a lot of traditional artists into digital animation. So they wanted someone who could speak both languages and had some meat on the bone to help with that. So I kind of have ridden the technology wave continuously since the 80s, and it's part of my DNA. Now, one of the things that I think I can do with people who are still hesitant about technology or kind of are, there's this idea of tech natives, the digital tourists. I feel like I'm a digital founder.
Yes.
Right? Because I've been at it for so long. But yeah, there are plenty of digital tourists, people who are as young as in their 30s and 40s who are not technically savvy or interested. I mean, my daughter's 31. She's always saying, Dad, can you fix this for me? I mean, it's, right? So, but for people who are in their 40s and 50s, there's a lot of opportunity in being tech savvy and understanding how this stuff kind of fits together. So that's kind of where I see my value now from the tech standpoint, is to really be an educator and to help people feel good about themselves, and that this is really tech is a brush, right? It's a pencil. It's how we do stuff, right? And AI is just another better pencil.
Yeah, I like that. And one thing you mentioned is, so you're working with people, let's say in their 50s, Gen X representatives. Do you ever work with anyone in their 20s, 30s, or who's your target? Who's the bell curve of the people that you coach, the line that you like to coach most, that you have the most impact for?
So the main area of that bell curve is 45 to 55,
45,
right?
55.
People who are kind of hitting an interesting wall that they didn't expect, which is, I've learned a lot. I've done a lot. I've kind of got a lot of notches in my belt. Now what? Now what do I do with this? Because they're already seeing down the road. They're seeing, the bell for everyone, I think, going forward, and seeing a lot in the press about that. So how do I do it? But there are also people who are starting early. I'm working with a guy right now who's 38, and he is. I think the reason he's working with me is because he knows that I can go there with him. I can do a deep dive on the meaning and purpose of his life and his career, and really help him organize this in a way that is going to be workable for him.
Before I turn it over, one thing is, what has been like the most challenging mindset that you had to conquer, let's say at 55? Meaning, when you said that prior people would work 20 years, but then I go back to, I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My grandfather and my uncles did 40 years at a steel plant. So it was 40 years. And then when I said, well, I was 20 years somewhere, they're like, man, we would spend our whole life, 40 years of their life. And now it's down. That's why I was so intrigued with your numbers. It's down to 48 months. My grandfather's rolling over from 40 years to 48 months. So what is a mindset that comes to you like, you know what? I feel like I know our audience will know. I'm Archie Bunker. I'm 62. What can you do for me, John? My life is over. I'm looking at casket shopping now, and it's like, no, you live well beyond. I mean, the life expectancy now is way beyond 80. Other stuff.
The biggest mindset shift that I think we all have to really confront is this idea of going from kind of an industrial era employee mindset to a digital era consultant mindset. No matter whether you are in a full-time job or freelance, you've got to take this attitude of a client providing value, of a consultant providing value to a client as opposed to an employee working under the direction of a supervisor. We are, the old paradigm was the 3 acts where you get a good education. Smiley, as you're talking about, your relatives, you've worked for 40 years and then you get to retire. And the system was set up that way. So people knew in the industrial era up until 40 years ago, 40 years ago, that you got to retire. There was a pension. And back to the question of longevity, you weren't going to live that long. I mean, 65 was 5 years. You had 5 years, 10 years, 15 years if you were lucky. Again, all bets are off, right? It's different. So the paradigm today is different. The paradigm is because education is lifelong, right? You never stop learning. You cannot just dine out on the degree that you earned, whether it's a high school degree or a college degree. You're always going to be learning new stuff. So that is one. So the first stage, then, the first act is self-knowledge, right? You've got to know, even in your 20s, you've got to know, who am I? I think this is why you're seeing Gen Z putting such a priority on these inner questions of meaning and purpose. And people think, well, what are they all about, these Gen Z? They're self-indulgent. No, they're not. They're being very pragmatic about the world that they're living in. They know they have to understand themselves and what they do well and where they fit in. And then the second stage is not working for 40 years. The second stage is being generative. You've got to be on it for your career and providing value. And that can come in various forms. And I think in this concept of a 60-year career, Wall Street Journal has done some really interesting stuff about the idea of the 60-year career, not the 40-year career. You're going to go through different phases. You're not going to be working for one company for 40 years. You're not necessarily going to be working continuously for 40 years. You're going to have periods where you're going to be off. You're going to be studying. You're going to be reflecting. You're going to be caring for others, right? And then you'll come back with that renewed experience and renewed sense of what that purpose is. And then the final stage of the career is not retirement, it's giving back, right? You're always in a mentor mode. You're always providing the wisdom that you've earned from all of the years back to support the generations that are coming up behind you. So that's the shift.
I know. I read an article where I was researching it. It talked about our generation, our baby boomers. We're the first one that's pretty much sandwiched because our parents are living longer. And then we have kids that are, let's say 20 through 35 that still we're helping them. And then we
Yep.
got to take care of ourselves. So we're
Yep.
really the sandwich one. And I said, I was on TikTok and someone was like talking about the battle between the millennials and the Gen X. And I'm like, we're Charles Atlas. We're holding it all up. We're holding up you millennials and zillennials. And they're like, get out of here, old man.
Get out of here, boomer.
Generational divides are ridiculous, and they're just stupid labels. And we're all going through each generation, each group of people at every age. We're all going through our own shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, we got to make a big tent, big, multi-generational, support one another kind of workforce. We all do different things well. It's not boomers taking jobs from Gen X, move over and all that. It's like, nah, it's ridiculous. Right. And the stats don't bear that out, by the way, right? Everyone's doing their own work at their own stage.
So, John, tell me this. Tell me about the book. You actually have it behind you there. Boomer Reinvention. If you want to hold it up for the camera there so everyone can see it. Some of the feedback that I've seen online is, referring to your book, there is hope after all, a must read, a field guide for the second half of life. John Tarnoff is the career transition whisperer.
Yeah, I like that one.
So tell me about what I can expect to find in reading this book.
I think the most so two aspects of the book. One is that there are 7 profiles in the book of people who have reinvented their careers through duress, responding to duress. You hear a lot of stories about people who now, the investment banker who now has a bait shop in Maine. It's like, come on. I mean, you could do whatever you want. You're an investment banker.
Right.
But the people who I profile all had to have a crisis, which pushed them forward. And they illustrated for me the 5 stages that I was talking about in the book, which I've kind of distilled down to those 3 steps that I talked about earlier. But it does come from this idea of getting rid of baggage, right? We all have baggage when we get to a certain age. Jobs we got fired from, relationships that we blew, maybe deals that didn't turn out the way we wanted them to. We all have regrets. And one of the points I make in the book is, in order to create the future, maybe this is another t-shirt, in order to create the future, we have to reconcile and forgive the past, right? Because all of those past disappointments are lessons for us to learn. So that becomes a really important starting point for, I think, a lot of people. Dre, you were asking about what should your colleague do. One of the things I would suggest that she do starting off is to reflect back on all of those years at work and reconcile, forgive herself for those judgments that may be standing in her way. So a good, healthy amount of reframing, I think, is important to move forward in this stage of life. And then to also, and this is part of building community, reach out to a handful of people that you know well, people that you've worked with. So friends, family, colleagues, former bosses are great for this. And have a real heart-to-heart sit down, kind of turn off the phones, go someplace quiet and say, okay, give me some feedback here. What did I do well? What did I not do so well? Where do you think I should go? What am I good at? What's your perception? And take notes. And do this with a handful of people and be open and listen for the commonalities. Listen for the stuff that everyone says. Here's something that, maybe you don't want to hear, but I'm going to tell it to you anyway. Those kinds of experiences can be very, very helpful to help you get straight about where you're going to go. And then you have to go through an ideation process of putting it all together, whether you're making lists or you're putting stuff on your whiteboard or you're putting a vision board together. There's a book called Designing Your Life from the Stanford faculty and Dave Evans and Bill Burnett. And I took a coaching certification from these guys. And it's applying design thinking to your life and your career. And central to the idea of design thinking is prototyping. Figure out a way where if you're interested in a particular thing, maybe you do want to open a bait shop. Well, spend a summer working in a bait shop before you decide to open one, right? Do all your research before you jump into the business that you think you want. A lot of people go back to school and it's the wrong decision. They go back to school because they want to finish the degree that they never finished. Well, maybe you've changed since then. Maybe it's no longer something that's the right thing for you to do. Do this experimentation before you commit 100%. So those are some of the ideas that I talk about in the book, and between the profiles and some really inspiring stories of people who come up with these unusual mindset shifts and ways of reinventing themselves, it's an eye opener.
Man, this is fascinating. Like I said, it's so many jewels of wisdom that you drop every time you speak. So I just see so many shirts, so many themes coming across. Before
Now we're getting off.
I'm serious. I mean, I've never heard these words, which is cool. The way you put them together. Prior to us moving into the Final Four, John, is there anything that we should have asked you that we didn't ask you that you wanted us to ask you, or anything about whatever? Because we want to make sure you say whatever we talked about your book, or maybe you're coming out with something you should have asked.
I just want to say that we haven't talked about ageism. We haven't called out ageism specifically. But it really is the last ism. It really is I think the one remaining obstacle in everyone's path, no matter how old you are. I mean, if you're young, you're going to get ageism from older people who say, "Oh, you're not experienced enough. Well, what makes you think you can run this department?" And people who are older, it's like, "Well, aren't you going to retire soon?" Which is this terrible, insulting question, or people assume you don't understand technology, or whatever the bias may be. Bias just sucks. And I think there's hope. There is a realization out, I think, in the career marketplace that because of this age bubble where you have increasing numbers of older people in the workforce, decreasing numbers of younger people, there's going to have to be a shift. So if you are experiencing ageism, know that at the end of the day, it's got to change, because the realities of the marketplace are demanding that it's going to change.
The one thing is, I'm glad you mentioned ageism. From your experience in Hollywood, which all of us outside of Hollywood, we see the big screens. I was just at the movie the other day. It's like a mystical industry. Do you find that ageism is same, similar, more pronounced in the Hollywood industry versus technology versus retail? It's the worst, or medical?
I think it's well. I think generally it's worse in entertainment than in most industries. In tech, it's the worst. Tech is worse because it's arrogantly worse in tech, more so than I think it is in entertainment. But yeah, absolutely. It's a young person's business. It is a business that sells youth. It is a business that kind of holds on to old stereotypes, and it's been really hard. It's been really hard to get women into positions, creative positions of influence and power. Minorities. It's gotten a lot better over the last 10, 20 years, but it's still got a ways to go.
And the one thing that I noticed, because when I look at the landscape of even your tech companies, they're still the same demographic at the top, which is really old. But they're giving the ageism against people of their age group because they rather have the young folks.
I know.
Do they not realize they're as old as we are or older at the top of these tech companies?
Ageism is bias against your future self. It's right.
Wow. That is bias against your future. Well, this has been fascinating, John. I know it's early. We could talk to you all day, all morning.
I'm having a great time.
Thank you. We appreciate that. But we're going to move into the Final Four. And the purpose of the Final Four. So with the Final Four, think of it like this. Anyone, alive or dead, if you could spend 24 hours with them, who and why? Who would that be and why?
This is going to be really crazy. And I met him once, Leonard Nimoy, Mr. Spock.
Mr. Spock.
And I met him once in my industry days, and I was very impressed with him. There was something very kind of wise. I mean, there's a lot of Spock in this guy. He really was very much like that character. I think he would have been just a great guy to hang out with for a day.
Just I was a Trekkie, but I was a late Trekkie because I think it was 98, 99. I checked into a hotel and Jerry Ryan was 6 of 9 and she was
Yeah,
aboard. And I turned on
right.
the TV and she was on. I'm like, this is such a fascinating episode. Of course, she was great eye candy. And then all of
Yeah,
a sudden, I became a huge Star Trek fan, especially with Captain Jean-Luc Picard.
yeah.
Went back and picked up all the rest of it. And then I just went forward. So I started my Trekkieism at 98, and it's just
Well,
fascinating.
So tell me this, John. What is one thing that you wish you were better at?
staying in my lane.
Tell me more about that.
So I'm a bit of a shiny new toy kind of a guy. I'm interested in a lot of things. I was accused once by a rocket scientist at JPL of being a polymath. I thought, what the hell is a polymath? And that is someone who is just interested in lots of different things and studies up on lots of different areas. Yeah, I've always had this kind of great interest in general knowledge, and so I tend to go down rabbit holes just because I'm fascinated. That does tend to kind of distract me from what I should be doing. I'll look at my watch and think, oh shoot, I just spent the
4
last
hours
hour
later.
researching something that has absolutely no application to anything that I'm doing, but I'm just really interested in it.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. What is something that never fails to make you laugh? Just brings tears out of your eyes.
So it's my dog. I have this Australian Shepherd dog. We do, my partner and I, and she is a never-ending source of laughter because she has this incredible range of facial expressions, and you just would swear that she is talking to you. And she is a funny dog, and I will watch her, take a look at her, and she'll look at me like that, and I will just burst out laughing. Definite comic relief during the day.
For sure, for sure. Well, John, I want to share this episode with as many of our followers as possible. I think it's a lot of great information. You know, there's a generation that I think unfortunately our society is trying to forget about. Those that are 50s and beyond. The content you shared is going to hopefully help them realize that there is life beyond 50. For those that are seeking, they'll have the tools from what you shared to apply for these jobs, not through using a resume, but using their community, using their network. John, I appreciate you being on the podcast.
It's been a pleasure, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.